to the podcast version of 32 Bar Cut, the show. A series for performers, about performers, made by performers. Every week, we give audition advice, share personal experiences, and sit down with fellow colleagues in the performing arts to chat about their life in the industry. If you are hearing this message, you are not currently a subscriber and will only be hearing the first half of the podcast. If you would like to hear the full interview, including the curtain call series, you'll want to head over to 32barcut.com, where you can find a link to our Patreon page. There you will have exclusive access to the entire video and private RSS podcast feed, as well as other subscriber-only content. Thanks for listening. Without further ado, on to the show.
Welcome to 32 Bar Cut, the show. Today we have a very exciting guest. He is the producer of Disney Theatricals, Thomas Schumacher. Welcome to the show.
I am so excited to be with you, particularly right now after what you've been through this week. It's crazy.
This week is so historical. I can't even believe that we're here. You know, there's so many talks of, well, we might be able to come back this date, or we might be able to come back this date. We're just not sure. So much insecurity with all of it. You know, the world is just something we don't even know anymore. But here we are. We made it to the finish line. You were in the audience. But before we get into that, the first thing I ask everyone when they come on, how are you?
I'm well. It's interesting because I've only come back to the States for 4 days to be here for Lion King. So I've been living in England mostly since June 1st. And I flew over so we could start getting those shows going. And I came back just for Lion King, and then tomorrow I begin the journey back. And then I don't come home to New York, where I live, until the second week of November. So It's a long time away. Essentially June 1st to November 8th or 9th, with 4 days back in the middle.
Wow, that is a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah.
Your job is so interesting in that I personally, I know you're the producer of Disney Theatricals, and I know that you're the face of what we do and you make things happen, but I don't know what a producer does. What does a producer do, and how do they make this thing work for us?
Well, it's interesting because you're not wrong to not have a sense of the whole thing, because our relationship is all about you in The Lion King, and then you also as a member of the Disney Theatrical family, so we pull you into other stuff, but that's what you see. I grew up only wanting to do theater, and I started seeing theater at a very young age. I started making theater before I'd ever seen a professional person do theater. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in San Francisco and had enormous support around me for the arts. Not in my family. No one in my family ever cared about the performing arts. But outside, I started working in the performing arts, and I went to college to be a theater major, and I started working immediately after that. I graduated and I went to work in a theater to train to be a producer. So it's all I've really wanted to do since I hung up my wig on the final performance of Pippin in the summer of 1979 in Santa Rosa at Summer Repertory Theater. So I was doing all these shows in rep, and I played Pippin. And I always threatened my friend Stephen Schwartz with, I'm going to sing for you if you don't, give me my way on this story point. But anyway, I hung my wig up and said, I'm going to go be a producer. So what a producer does fundamentally, and it changes whether you're institutionally producing, which is what we do, or independently producing. Independent producers on Broadway will encounter a piece of material either because somebody brought it to them, or because they went and sought it, or because they fundamentally put it together. And then those people have to go raise money, and then they put the show on, and then they hope it works, and then it becomes a business. But I've always worked institutionally. So I grew up in the nonprofit, which always is a surprise to people, because something as commercial as Disney, you assume I have a business degree, or I don't have any of that. I don't have a business degree. I don't have no MBA, none of that. Everything I know, I learned on the job, except how to make theater, which I learned in school and on the job. My job as an institutional producer is to run a company, Disney Theatrical, which is a big staff. It's like a nonprofit regional theater. There's, we have a publicity department, we have a marketing department, we have a production department, we have a development department, we have an education department. And all of that eventually comes up to me, and I have to represent that inside the Walt Disney Company. I don't have to raise money. But because we have been so successful at Disney, we haven't had to ask Disney for any money in 20 plus years, mostly because Beauty and the Beast started and became very successful. And then Lion King has always created the cash flow by which we could do other stuff. So my job is to make sure that we deliver on the promise to our shareholders that we're making money, to deliver on the promise of our aesthetic point of view, that we will always endeavor to surprise, delight, and move the needle forward somehow, and that we will be inclusive in who we make shows with. And then when we are lucky to have a hit, then we take it around the world. And it's our job at Disney Theatrical so while you've been waiting to get started and rehearsing, I've been in England, right? And we got Mary Poppins back up at the Prince Edward Theatre in London. We got Lion King back up at the Lyceum in London. We got a brand new production of Frozen on its feet at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. We got a brand new production of Beauty and the Beast, which is gorgeous, in Bristol, which will tour the UK. And we oversaw a license of Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. So I'm licensing shows. I'm literally in the room producing shows. Sometimes I'm under a piece of furniture with a head carpenter saying, how do we shoot smoke out of this? Or I'm in the box office saying, how do we sell more tickets? It could be any of that. That's a long answer to your short question.
Oh no, but that is the thorough answer that I was looking for, because producers, like you said, do all sorts of things, and there's producers that have to raise money. So it's very interesting to hear you say, hey, we don't have to do that anymore. There's other things, there's other ways that I'm used and other ways that I do my job, my role here.
But I'm held accountable for the money.
Yes.
So, and because I've blown it a couple of times, and when I don't get it right, I'm accountable for that. So for example, say we do a show like, the two examples, it's only happened twice out of 10 or more shows we've done, with Tarzan and Little Mermaid. Neither one of them, they lost money on Broadway. Mm-hmm. But I went out and found partners, took those shows around the world. Tarzan played over a decade in Germany. It's been seen all over the world, everywhere. Same for Little Mermaid. And they're all, profitable now. So even though they lost money on Broadway, I had to go dig out of that hole, fill it back up with money, and then move it forward. So, yeah. So, but if you blow it, and we're held responsible, and I can't spend more money every week on a show than it's making. Yeah. Because that's irresponsible, and B, it violates the precepts of a commercial company.
But I imagine too, you have to take risks, right? In this field, it's theater. It can't all be safe. And so 1997, we're workshopping The Lion King. You've made the decision that Julie Taymor, she's the director. This is going to be the one for this show. What did that feel like? It seems like such a huge risk and so much money to put forward. Did you know it was going to be a hit?
No. The thing that happened is in 1990, I was asked by the then chairman of Disney Studios, a really smart guy named Jeffrey Katzenberg, who then founded DreamWorks with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen. But Jeffrey was then running Disney Studios, and I had produced my first movie for Disney. I'd never made a movie before. But nobody wanted
Down Under.
Down Under.
Yes.
Yeah. So and I produced that, and Jeffrey then said, let's do something else. And I said, okay. And he handed me two things. One was The Nightmare Before Christmas with Tim Burton. And the other one was this thing called King of the Beasts, which became The Lion King. And it's a long saga, and that's been talked about a lot, but how that movie got made. But the movie did get made. And while the movie was being made, I stepped away from being the day-to-day producer, became the executive producer, because I took over Disney animation development and all the ideas like Pocahontas and Mulan and all those things. And then the chairman of the studio, the company rather, Michael Eisner, ironically, I was just emailing with yesterday. He's been out of Disney for 15 years or something now, but he reached out because he saw Lion King was in the news and he went, how did it go? So we were going back and forth, but he came to me and said, we should put Lion King on stage. And I told him it was the worst idea I'd ever heard.
Wow.
And he said, no, we should do it. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. You can't make it look like the movie. That seems to be the goal around here, and it'll never work. And finally, he did point out that he was my boss and that I should go do it. And so I literally went back to my office and flipped through my Rolodex, which is what we did back then because we didn't have a contact file on a computer because we didn't have a computer. And I called Julie Taymor at home from a number I had from 10 years before when I had tried to work with her before Disney.
Wow.
And I literally just called her at home and she goes, hi, how you been? And she really hadn't heard of The Lion King. And by this time it was the biggest movie in the world at the time. But of course she hadn't heard of it. And, but I thought that's a good sign. So we started working on this idea. We workshopped it. And funnily enough, during the pandemic or right before the pandemic, I was cleaning some files and I came across an unmarked video and I didn't know what it was. And I sent it to this company. You can put things in a box and they send you video in a box and they'll send you back a digital copy. I said, I wonder what was on that video. It was the original workshop to The Lion King.
Wow.
With Keith David as Mufasa,
Oh
Mario Cantone as Timon.
I can totally see Keith David as Mufasa. Yes.
Oh yeah. I think he was wondering what that big thing was on his head, but he was
Like,
anyway, we had the whole thing. But even Garth demonstrating how the gazelles would work with on your head and on the arms, all in cardboard. And we did this workshop and everyone from the Walt Disney Company, Michael Eisner, Michael Ovitz worked there then, and a man named Joe Roth, who was head of the studio, they didn't get it at all. And they shut it down. So when you ask, was it a risk?
Yeah.
It was really our fault that they didn't get it. I mean, I always tell the story, to be like, how could you miss it? But we had them sitting so close, they didn't understand what they were looking at.
The big picture.
And when they all drove away and left us at 890 Broadway, the old rehearsal studio down there, Michael Bennett's old building. When they all drove away, Peter Schneider, who I did the show with originally, and my virtual sibling, and Julie Taymor and I were out front saying, well, that didn't go well. And Peter wisely said, we have to show them the thing in scale. And we flew out to California and we convinced Michael Eisner to come back a couple of months, 3 months later. And we built 3 versions of Scar, we built 3 versions of Zazu and 3 versions of Timon. And then we demonstrated them on the stage of Beauty and the Beast in full light with Michael 15 rows back, Michael Eisner. And he bought into it and we raced to get it done and ran off to Minneapolis. We never got the show to run before we did the first preview. We couldn't, the first 2 weeks of previews, we couldn't get into the Stampede.
Wow.
We had to stop the show for like 6 minutes.
Oh.
And so I would go on stage and do a speech before the show about we're going to stop and change some scenery, stay in your seats.
Yes.
I mean, we had no idea what we were doing. And none of us had ever done a Broadway show before. Wow. So it was a risk, but it was, and everyone thought it was a terrible idea. And we felt there was something there. And then, of course, audiences went crazy. And the rest is, kind of theatrical history.
You never know. You never know. And it's interesting too, because I was going to ask you this. With being an actor, I'm at the mercy, right? I'm at the will of a director or a casting director. I'm waiting for the phone to ring. There's so very little I'm in control of. And I'm curious if that's how you feel sometimes as a producer, that you present this project and then you're kind of at the mercy of, will this work or not?
Well, yeah, first off, let's address the fact that as an actor, the 2 biggest things you are in control of is the original yes or no, and then how you are able to fulfill the vision of the people you came to be with. I mean, just imagine for a second. I mean, people that I so love and adore. We lost Sam Wright this year, which is, for those of us who knew Sam and worked with him, his extraordinary generosity. He was the most experienced person in that theater.
Wow.
right? He was a star already. He was a grown man wearing this thing on his head. And I remember like walking up to him, I walked house left down the aisle in Minneapolis, and he was on stage for the longest time, rehearsing. And it was the scene after They Live in You, when he does that sort of lotus pose, and little Simba does it, which is among my like top 10 favorite things in The Lion King. And it makes me, whenever it's perfectly timed out just right with the lights and the kid doing everything and putting the headdress back on him, I always burst into tears. And I said to him, I'm so sorry it's taking this long. And he said, look at me, I'm playing a king.
Yeah.
And he meant everything about being a Black man playing a king, about a show filled with Black people, but he's not playing a role dependent on race. It was a whole lot of that stuff, as you know. We can get into that later if you want. But and the leap of faith Sam took with Julie. And then let's go to the other side of the equation. It's no secret, everyone knows, but I'm very close to and adore Heather Headley, and we've worked together a lot. And she created the role of Nala. She was Audra's understudy in Ragtime in Canada when we cast her. And she had left Northwestern. She left college to go be to cover for Audra. And then we cast her. And Audra's the one who said, Heather, you have to go do this. So here we have Sam Wright and Heather Headley. One very experienced, been the lead in many shows, Pippin, and of course, Tap Dance Kid and all this stuff. And then here's Heather Headley, like never actually is Broadway debut, having to create a character has 5 lines in the movie, basically. And each one of them had faith in the process and did everything they could do to fulfill the yes. Mm-hmm. The yes to do it. Now the yes has to be, how do I do it? So that's a lot of control and a lot of faith. Producers, interestingly, have a lot of control because if you, at least the way I do it or we do it, I pick everybody, right? So I went to Julie Taymor, and then Julie Taymor came to me and said, okay, what about, we actually had a different designer before Richard Hudson, and then that designer didn't want to do it, and Julie, it didn't work. So then we went to Richard Hudson, and Julie came to me and said, what about Garth Fagan? And I said, interestingly, the same festival I wanted to work with you on, I was trying to work with Garth on, so I've known his work forever. I would love to work with Garth. Lebo, I already knew, right? Because we'd already made the movie together.
Right.
And we became very close during that. Not every people know that too. I mean, we're very close to Lebo, and we became very close during that. So we had a lot. It was just bringing together this group. Mark Mancina, who worked so much on the music, and probably is not really even known for it, but wrote a lot of these songs, as you know. And we all knew each other. And then we were adding Julie, who I didn't know. And so there's the picking people part, and then there's the having faith in process, because you have to submit. You have to submit to other people's visions. And then you, in a sense, become a version of an editor. Mm. If I think you do this right, you become a partner with each person to the degree that they're comfortable doing that, to say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Julie Taymor is an artist of extraordinary power and depth. But there's a whole lot of stuff that's not on that stage that she created or thought about. Mm-hmm. And it's not there because either we looked at it and said that won't fit, whether it's fit artistically, fit physically. And you have to be there for them, but also be willing to say, this moment's not going to work. Yeah. And if you have that relationship, and Julie and I, it was funny, we reenacted it all when we were doing Lion King in Shanghai, because we were doing it in Mandarin. But with our component of South African actors who all had to learn Mandarin, and which is something.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And we were there, and I was sitting with her at the director's table, and she goes, how did we originally stage this moment? Because it's not working. And so we were just back in it again. And I think when people are of that extraordinary talent, you have to submit to it, but not give up everything to it.
Yes, yes. I think that word you used, editing, is key. It makes sense. They put it all together. They do, make it magical, but then you give it more nuance and just take things out that need to be taken out so that it really works and that it's sustainable. Because honestly, The Lion King is such a monster of a show that I could imagine, if it was in Julie's original vision, you could probably do it one night and then everyone is broken and done and like passed out somewhere.
Well, she's a genius, and I just adore her without limit. But we all need someone to say, "I get that," but and she's fantastic with that. She anyone who says otherwise simply hasn't worked with her. She's fantastic about partnering and coming together and saying, "These are my ideas," and there was a lot of sharing of ideas, and in the beginning, the show you're doing is like 12 minutes shorter than the show we opened with on Broadway.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have heard
on the
that.
10th on a 10th anniversary, we cut on 10th anniversary, we cut quite a bit because it was long, and we never had a chance to fine tune it. There's so many people who have been part of the history of this. Michelle Steckler, who was with us from the very beginning as Julie's associate director, and then became the associate producer. Aubrey Lynch. I don't know if you know Aubrey, but Aubrey was the last dancer cast by Alvin Ailey for the Alvin Ailey Company. He was a company member, became choreographer, then he became dance supervisor, then he became associate producer, did 10 companies around the world, and now he has a big fancy job at ABT. But it's funny because now, somehow I was a lot older than Aubrey when we did it, and somehow our ages have sort of merged as you get older. And he's a frequent guest in my house. We spend a lot of time together, and
feel like
now we just talk. Yeah,
aging in reverse or something.
Well, that's deeply irritating. That's deeply irritating for all of us. Yeah.
It's okay. So we haven't talked about this yet, but you were in the audience of our first performance back. What was that experience like for you?
Well, of course, when you have a special performance like that, like a first night back, I was filled with a lot of emotion because I'm surrounded because Garth was there, and Aubrey was sitting. He was in my group, sitting 2 seats away from me, Aubrey Lynch, and my husband was with me, and he lived through the entire. It was his idea that the movie had songs. We're about to celebrate our 40th anniversary, so he's been through it all. So to be with, and I was sitting right behind Julie with my hands on her shoulders, and it was and her other half, Elliot Golden, was there. So it was all of us together, and so that was deeply moving. And Lebo was right there, so we were all together. So that's moving. But then as we've been opening the shows, I'd already been through this in London with the company there, which opened 2 years after Broadway. So I knew kind of what it was going to feel like from an audience perspective. But then in the American context, for me, I couldn't help but look at that stage and know the stories of so many people who I wouldn't out here. That's for them to tell their stories. But we had company members who went through serious trauma. Mm-hmm. We had company members in South Africa who weren't sure they were ever going to get out of the hospital. Mm-hmm. We had people who really struggled and were hurt and were damaged and suffered a great deal during the pandemic. And to pretend that didn't happen is to deny the truth of why theater is powerful. So I'm watching a stage knowing so many personal stories. I know the people on that stage who were fine, right? We have friends in the show, principal actors in the show who, turn their house into a studio, make it happen, do the job, move forward. You know what I mean? And we have other people who literally thought they weren't going to ever breathe again, let alone sing so gloriously. Mm-hmm. We have people like Brennan who are brand new coming in, like, this is my chance, right? That's its own story. We have people who really went through, and we had people up there who were very frightened. And that also includes people backstage who I've known forever. And I have to own that, right? I want everyone to be safe, which is why I'm so happy about the New York mandates for everyone's vaccinated, and we're going to take care of people, and we're going to test all the time, and we're going to do all this, because I want everyone, the crew, the orchestra. I mean, Dave, who plays the flute in The Lion King, I mean, he's been with us since he's been there since the beginning, yes. Right? I mean, and everybody is bringing their own truth to it, and I can't pretend that didn't happen. We had a case. You were probably on a call when an actor in The Lion King, who I've known for many, 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 many years, and she and I see each other outside of the show, and she goes to events with me all the time, and I love her, and she like spoke up about hair, right? Things that the audience isn't thinking about, but things that they, which was, and there is great respect and affection between the two of us, but she was willing to be so candid with me. I could not think about that while I was watching her, and you know what I mean. And I adore her, and there she was, just beaming and glowing and being unbelievably funny and brilliant in the show. And watching her in the curtain call, I literally burst into tears. And I told her this afterwards, because all those stories that people don't think matter enormously. The triumphs, the failures, the fear, the everything, the seeking a better work environment, all of this together. So when I'm looking at the show, and I always say this, it's always about people to me, but it is about the people to me, right? You're playing animals, but it's about the people. And there is no Lion King without those people backstage who get you dressed, get your wig on you, get that costume on you, get the makeup on you, who change, you don't have to change your clothes a lot during the show. Other people have some 20 changes during the show.
Yes.
These people are all the life force of the show, on stage and off stage. And because I've been around it so long and was there when we invented it, I know, right? When we do that stampede, I know what the female dancing wildebeests wore in the very beginning that we had to alter because they were all just breathing raffia. Oh. I know what those costumes weighed before we redesigned them. I know, right? So that doesn't mean I know their individual experiences. I only know what they can share with me. But it does mean that I have to react to it. So I'm seeing all of that when the show happens.
That's such a rich experience, because you know it so intimately. You can't just watch it. It's almost as if you're on stage with us experiencing it, because you know everyone so intimately, and you know the history of the show and what's going on backstage. I think because the audience, they see the show, but unless they have some sort of history or relationship with theater, I don't think they give a second thought about dressers or puppets or makeup or what goes on backstage. But there's so much happening. So much.
I think that, yes, but I think that they may not know it, but they feel it. And, and I'll give you two examples. One is obviously, those of us who were there in the very, very, very beginning and who watched this young man, Jason Reyes, invent the character of Simba, right? So different than what the character had been in the movie. And, his endless night, his, it's a heartbreaking story. And many of us stood by him and tried to help him navigate a life that he couldn't navigate, right? So that ended, so horribly. But I can't help but think about that, right? So yes, the audience doesn't know what that is. The people who have been, all that, they can't possibly know that. But let me give you an example. Everybody I know, and you may know this about me, I spend a great deal of time in Italy, and I love classical art, and I study it, and I care about it. And everybody I know tells me when they walk in and look at Michelangelo's David for the first time, how they cry. And it's inexplicable because they've seen scaled copies everywhere, things exactly the same size, looks exactly the same. There are casts of it in plaster in London and stuff. But somehow seeing it, they don't know how that happened. They don't know how this block of marble was brought in from Carrara to Florence. They don't know that it had these weird seams in it, that no one wanted to work with it. They don't know that Michelangelo wanted to make this triumphant figure of David as a symbol of Tuscany, of defending itself against marauders. They don't know how he drew it and then chipped away and drilled. They don't know that someone had to rub it with wet straw to get that, because there was no such thing as sandpaper. And they don't know any of that. And yet they feel it. And there's no question for me that the audience, and Julie will tell you this, the audience doesn't look at every one of those beads on your corset. Mm-hmm. But, we donated some of those corsets and costumes to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London because they are art. But when we donated them, I asked the lady who did all the beading in London to be with us when we did it, because people don't know who she is. They don't know how she beads it. They don't know what those beads are. And because you have an intimate relationship with that costume, the intricacy and the beauty of it. But I agree with Julie. They feel it. They don't know it, but they somehow feel it. That the hand of the artist, whether it's the person who made the stuff you're wearing or you, right? When they don't know what Giza Boyabo means. Yeah. They don't know, but they feel it.
Yes.
They feel it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to circle back a bit because you mentioned our chats, the chats we had over Zoom during the break. For those of you watching, we had chats with our producers over the break, and it really came about after the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor deaths and the protests around that, and I guess the rise or reemergence of acknowledgement of police brutality, but also microaggressions at work and injustices and discrimination at work, and how to navigate through that. And so you and Anne asked us if we would like to meet and talk about this. And so I want to hear from you about what Disney Theatricals is doing to fashion a better world for us and make this all happen in a way that protects everyone at work.
So, well, it's an appropriate question, and it shifts slightly between companies of shows. As you know, if you just assemble all of our shows together, going all the way back, we employ, well, I think everyone else has come up with a statistic. I don't know that it's true, but we certainly employ more people of color than any other individual producer on shows of this scale, whether it's shows obviously like Lion King or even Aladdin, but even how we've chosen to produce Frozen, right? Mm-hmm. That there's a consciousness about those choices. So that brings with it a responsibility, and it's very different if you're touring in the Lion King, right? And so, for example, in the calls with the tour, there have been many tours of the Lion King out, but there was a big shift when we had played every major city in America 5 times. So we couldn't go back anymore. So we said, what if we fashioned a smaller, slightly smaller version that would look very big in a small town, But the thing that we didn't pay attention to was, there's no excuse for this failure other than, and it's not an excuse, it's a real ignorance.
A blind spot.
A blind spot, if you will, because it just didn't occur to me the world in some places can be as terrible as it is. And so we sent a tour out playing small towns, and I don't think provided enough security and support for the company. And we were in towns that just weren't used to a group arriving with their New York pride, I'm part of the Lion King, I just operate freely here. And we did not step up because we just didn't know. And people really raised that from the tours. And so to that end, we now travel with security for the company. And I use that as an example of something really overt, right? That we now have security people who are with the company. They strategize as we go into different cities. They work with local law enforcement. Please understand, we're bringing the most respected company of people you can bring into your town. This is what we're going to expect from you for the venues and also for the artists in the show, how we're going to be there for you. Does that erase every problem that we could encounter? No, but it means that we're getting ahead of it.
Yeah.
So that's a very practical thing. Another practical thing that grew out of these conversations, and we referenced it before, is something that particularly for non-Black members of your audience, it would never occur to them, probably prior to all of this, the the challenges and demands and needs for Afro-textured hair.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people don't, and by the way, there's a whole lot of ladies on Broadway who have hair issues from having their hair in pin curls every night, what we call wig prep.
Mm-hmm.
Because every night, but how do we manage hair?
Mm-hmm.
And so, because it's about the prep of the hair, the taking care of the hair, management of hair, building, in our case, puppets and masks that can accommodate hair. How do we do it? And also, equally importantly, what do we tell people when they audition?
Mm-hmm.
What are you told before you get cast and then told, oh, you're gonna have to cut that hair off because you've got dreads that go all the way down your back, or you've got extensions, or you've got this or that. You need to know if you would like to be in the show, there are certain things that are gonna work. And bright blue 38-inch extensions going down your back are not going to work in The Lion King. So we have to figure out how to manage the process with respect and dignity and honesty and being direct.
Mm-hmm.
And so to that end, we brought in a bunch of consultants who've worked with our hair and makeup team to talk about how to manage hair, how to take care of hair, how to be respectful of hair, how to recognize that hair can be sacred for people. And I've taken workshops in that, because I think that unless you're told, and even the Hair and the Makeup Union has participated with us at Disney in this because they don't have the information either,
Mm-hmm.
which I have found fascinating. And in our own industry, the backstage hair and makeup people are not as experienced, in fact, as some elements of television and film, because I don't know why. I have no excuse for that. And the level of complexity had never been presented to me as directly as it was. And so we've taken great action on that. And then there's issues, by the way, you're welcome to ask me anything you want, but there's issues in terms of text and content within scenes. And there are issues about how those scenes are directed and or taught.
Oh, I see. Yes, yes.
And that we need to be respectful of, because I think sometimes people who are, as resident directors, associate directors, people who are working with the company, may be so far removed from how that the scene was originally created with a set of actors.
Mm-hmm.
They might be using a shorthand that is either inaccurate or disrespectful or just completely inappropriate. And we have to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
How we can talk about this scene. In some cases, there's dialogue on some of our shows that might have been okay when a film was animated, but when it's a theatrical experience and you're looking at actors, there's dialogue that needs to be debated. And by the way, everyone does not agree. And it doesn't divide with one group agrees and one group doesn't, because even within playing the same parts or how they're acted or how they're spoken about, but we need a much, much higher awareness of how we come to that scene, with the respect we bring into that scene, and recognizing the lived experience of the person who's going to be playing that part. Yeah. And how are they taught the role and how do they respond to it? That's just scratching the surface of things that I learned in those discussions.
Yeah, and I know it's what was amazing about that for me, from my perspective, is that when I booked The Lion King, my life changed, right? So I'm just excited to be a part of the cast. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to say anything that's going to upset anyone. I'm good. And I think that most actors feel that way when they get a wonderful opportunity. You don't want to be the squeaky wheel. But when we had those meetings and we were able to really talk freely about different ways we were feeling, it opened doors, and I think it all made us feel closer and able to really access you and Anne in a way that would benefit everyone. And when we are gone and newer people come into the cast, it will benefit them as well. And when you put up another production for Disney Theatricals, they'll be benefited by these talks. And so even though it's icky and difficult in the moment, it all works out.
I mean, we did try to make them as, we tried to reduce the ick as much as possible, but when there's something icky to be talked about, you can't run away from it. And we keep referencing Anne. Anne Court is a co-producer of Lion King. She's been with Disney Theatrical for a very long time. She grew up in the theater. She was an actress at Stratford when she was young. She is such a trusted and close ally, and she cares about The Lion King so much and so deeply knows it. And we've had to sort of divide and conquer all these territories around the world as we split up. So like I'm heading I'll be in Holland this week. I'll be in Liverpool and Holland this coming week, one on
Wow.
beauty and then on a new Aladdin in Holland. And she's going to be with the Aladdin company here and then manage it. So, we divide up. But Ann Court and I wanted to do those meetings without someone between us and the company. And it was important, but it's also important, and that's why I was so grateful to particularly either long-term ensemble members or who feel more comfortable, or long-term principals in the show just speaking up, because it lets everyone else know that you have to be able to do that. Now, there are certain things that are never going to change, in the Broadway context. We do 8 a week. The entire economy of Broadway is built on 8 performances a week. Maybe someday someone will change that, but that's going to change the economy of how it works. There are things that are not going to change, like when you're in the ensemble of a show, you're playing the part as directed, as designed, and as it's always been, and you're doing the choreography as has been created and as hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have done it around the world. A lot of these things are not going to change because it's a show that you want to know whenever you see it, you're seeing that version, right? And that there's no question, L. Stephen Taylor, who is so great as Mufasa, he's so breathtaking, but L. Stephen plays it very different than Sam Wright because there are different points in their life, right? L. Stephen was a new dad when he started playing it, and Sam was a man, and an old guy, and so he's still a warrior, but of course they're going to bring their own truth to it. And as you see the show, people do bring, your Nala is very different than Heather's, is very different than, I've seen so many Nalas that, and some Nalas you never have to see again. But certain territories. But what you're going to bring to it is very different. When you are singing Shadowland, it's very different than watching someone sing it in Mandarin or someone sing it in Japanese, and what their own sense of nationalism is, and how they exist, and what battle they had to face to get there. So of course, within the principal things are going to change, but other things should change and shift between actors. But the show itself, there are obligations to the show that aren't going to change. We can make it appropriate, comfortable as we can, but those things are fixed. Other things, we have to change and stay with it. And if I'm going to take 12 minutes out on the 10th anniversary, and then someone says to me, these 4 lines of dialogue actually make me very uncomfortable, then we're going to change it. Yeah. And, I'm working on a revival of Aida right now, the musical that we did right after Lion King. And this is an interesting example because we're reinvestigating. David Henry Wong wrote the book to Aida. Elton John and Tim Rice famously wrote the music and won a Tony Award for it. And the songs are great. And my beloved Heather Headley played Aida. And yet the director of the show is Shelley Williams, who was in the original production and played Nehebka and eventually covered Aida. So as we work on that, there's stuff in that show. It's going to truly be a revisal, not just a revival, because now looking at this context, I both with the agency of Aida, certain actions she takes or does not take, certain language that she uses, certain words that are said to and in front of other characters have a different resonance, or they're different now for our time, and they need to change. And that's why I picked Shelley. I'm completely comfortable with that. And we have very frank conversations about it. And that's where we need to be. Now, does the audience need to know that? No. Is that part of the advertising? No. That's our job, right? That's our job together. Yeah. To work this stuff out and to find it. And to present it in that way. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So you talked a bit about with these conversations, you're in the Broadway League and have been. You've chaired on the Broadway League. And so I imagine that you all saw each other a lot during the past 18 months. So how did you all come to the decision that it's time and that it's safe? And what has the past 18 months been like for you and for the Broadway League?
Well, it was very challenging. When we first became aware of the pandemic, that it was really going to hit, I was actually abroad. I was in Italy in my other life, producing a giant benefit during Carnivale in Venice, featuring my pal Ashley Brown, who of course was right out of college in a tour we did called On the Record, and then she was the 15th Belle, and of course she was the original Mary Poppins.
Yes.
So I was with Ashley doing this giant benefit, and we raised a lot of money that night. And then they said, "Get out of town. We're closing Carnivale. There's a pandemic."
Wow.
And we raced out, leaving bobby pins and wigs flying, and because it was Carnivale. And I came back to America, and it was clear I raced off to Mexico, down to Aladdin, and you went to New York, and
Adrienne and I hope that you have enjoyed listening to the show thus far. If you'd like to hear the full interview and get access to the curtain call, head on over to 32barcut.com, where you can find a link to our Patreon page. There you will have exclusive access to the entire video collection and private RSS podcast feed, as well as other subscriber-only content. All right, that's all I got. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.